Week 15 of the fantasy football season. And here's a few tight ends I looked at off the wire this week. The first guy, Hunter Henry of the New England Patriots. So Hunter Henry, he finally had that breakout game with 2 touchdowns in Week 14 at Pittsburgh. And if he just had a quarterback all season that could be at least halfway decent and get him the football, we know Hunter Henry throughout his career has been a red zone threat and a big play type tight end. Week 14 at Pittsburgh, he had the 3 catches, 40 yards and 2 touchdowns. So Week 15, a tough matchup, no doubt about it, versus the Chiefs. Give up the 6th least amount of fantasy points to tight ends on the season. But pretty much this offense has been decimated over there in New England, and they don't really have much in the passing game besides Juju, Parker, and if the Mario Douglas comes back, and Hunter Henry in the middle. So right now, after coming off a nice performance, and him and Bailey Zapp had a good rapport versus a good defense of the Steelers, he's available, Henry, right now in 76% of fantasy leagues. The next tight end's Tanner Hudson of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Tanner Hudson, the last month of the season, he's been carving out a decent role and putting up some decent fantasy points in PPR leagues with at least 5.80 fantasy points or more over the last month. Week 11 at Baltimore, 4 catches, 49 yards. Week 12 versus the Steelers, 4 catches, 18 yards. Week 13 at the Jags, 4 catches, 35 yards. And Week 14 versus the Colts, 2 catches, 21 yards and a touchdown. So he's been a red zone threat, is Tanner Hudson. Nice seam runner in the middle of the field. And him and Jake Browning working with the second team, pretty much training camp and until Joe Burrow got hurt, have a good rapport and can make plays. So Week 15, a decent matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings that give up the 19th most fantasy points at tight ends on the season. So Hudson, he's getting targets, he's making plays, and like I said, he's been very serviceable over the last month, and he's available as well in 96% of fantasy leagues. The next tight end's Tyler Conklin of the New York Jets. So Zach Wilson back in the starting lineup, and this Jet team actually put up 30 points in that game, saying it all season that he's the number 2 target in this offense behind Garrett Wilson. So the last few games for Conklin: Week 12 versus Miami, 4 catches, 33 yards. 15 versus Atlanta, 3 catches, 35 yards. And Week 13 versus Houston, 4 catches, 57 yards. So Week 15, a matchup at the Miami Dolphins, a game if the Jets want to have a chance to play spoiler and win it. They know they got to put up points early and often and throw the football a whole lot, or it'll go the other way where they're down 10, 14 points out of the gate and have to pass a lot. So Tyler Conklin this season, he's definitely been a serviceable tight end, in my opinion. And now with Zach Wilson back in the lineup, we know the targets are going to be there, and he's the number 2 passing option in the passing game, available in 81% of fantasy leagues. Next tight end's Cade Otton of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Cade Otton, he's been up and down all season, some great games, and then some games where he has a goose egg and does nothing. But the last 3 out of 4 weeks, he's added 8 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues. Week 11 at the Niners, 4 for 49. Week 12 at Indianapolis, 4 for 45. Week 13, the goose egg versus the Panthers. And Week 14, a big touchdown at the end of that game at Atlanta. 2 catches, 16 yards, and a touchdown. So Otton, we know, is a big target, 6'7", in the red zone. He's got good hands, and him and Baker Mayfield, for the most part, have had a decent rapport this season. Otton available 62% of fantasy leagues, and with a decent matchup coming up in Week 15 at the Packers, he's an ad this week, and the 5th and final tight end I looked at off the wire this week here. Davis Allen of the Los Angeles Rams. So Davis Allen, 5th-round draft pick, past NFL draft, and he went out there and stepped in after Long got hurt and Tyler Higbee wasn't active for this game, with 4 catches, 50 yards, and a touchdown for this Ram team. So he made some plays in the middle of the field. He even hurdled the defender or 2 as well in this ball game. Here's Davis Allen, available in 99% of fantasy leagues. Obviously, it always could be a fluky game, but for a guy as a rookie to come out of nowhere where he hasn't had opportunity all season and to put in a big game is definitely someone I would mention on the list. So next week, a decent matchup versus the Commanders, a defense that really can't stop anyone. If you really want to go deep on the waiver wire in the deepest of leagues and need a tight end, that one's out there, like I said, in 99% of fantasy leagues. That's a few tight ends I will tear it off the waiver wire for Week 15 of the fantasy football season.